Thank you very much. Nice introduction. Truth Week. Well, when I was in college, what I was taught was true turned out to be not so much. So I want to get into conversation about that, and I'll talk for a while, and then I welcome your questions or vicious criticism, whatever you prefer. What I was taught was also, I think, what's just intuitive to people. Instinct says that consumers are often victims. You mentioned I won these 19 Emmy Awards. I won them bashing business because I started as a consumer reporter with this theme that people get preyed upon by people looking to make money. And it's just unfair, often cruel. And there were infinite stories I could do about people cheating people. The Coffee Association was running ads saying, coffee's the drink that picks you up. Well, it calms you down. So that seemed contradictory, and I could test it. We could call them up and say, how can you say this? We have research to back this up. Really, what's the research? Well, we surveyed thousands of people. We asked them, what do you get out of your coffee break? Some people said it picked them up, some people said it calmed them down. You know, from minor stuff like that to bank runs, instinct says you need intervention in the market because markets are imperfect, you need government, you need lawyers, regulators, life is complex, I can't be an expert on everything, can't get my brain around how you build a sewage treatment plant, for example. So you want smart people to organize things, and instincts, he went to Harvard, he ought to better know how to plan an economy. Central planning makes sense to people, and it's historically sensible for us in that we grew up, our ancestors did, in tribes where if you didn't follow what the tribal elders said, harvest the fruit at the right time, you died and didn't give birth to your parents. So also your parents planned your life up until college age or so, and you're alive because of the guidance you got as children. Instinct says we need specialists to plan. And I won those awards calling for regulation, but then I stayed in the beat and I watched the regulators work, and it took me years to wake up to the fact that all these rules do much more harm than good. They stifle the innovation that makes our lives better. They take vast amounts of time and money. I mean, the money is not just the money that goes to pay the bureaucrats, that's the least of it. The big money is all the wasted time we spend trying to fill out the forms. You got some of the smartest kids at Penn State going out to physics or engineering, going to law school to learn how to game the system. This doesn't make people more prosperous. And they keep increasing. They pass 1,000 pages of new rules every week. And this is, I think, now why unemployment has always popped back up after recessions. It didn't this time. Partly because if you hire somebody, you can never fire them. There are a million obstacles to opening any business, even the simplest of businesses. I tried to open this outside Bill O'Reilly's office. To do it legally would have taken me about 2 months. I didn't quite have 2 months. The lawyer said, okay, you can sell the lemonade if you give people the money back and don't let them drink the lemonade. So I had to stop. To get the real license, you have to take a food safety course, pass a test, make sure you have things like a big fire extinguisher that's approved by the fire department, and all sorts of one-size-fits-all rules that cities pass thinking they're doing a good thing, protecting customers. And most people say, well, we gotta have to, because what's the alternative? And I say the alternative is the invisible hand. But that doesn't make sense to people. And it's hard to explain as a reporter. For one thing, it's invisible. And a better word, I believe, is Frederick Hayek's spontaneous order. That life works pretty well under the spontaneous order of people working together voluntarily. You don't need central planning. But it's not instinctive. If you'd never seen a skating rink, and I told you, you're the regulators, I'm a greedy businessman, and I want to make money renting a rink, and I'm going to put ice down and charge people money so they can strap sharp blades to their feet and zip around on the ice, different skill levels, young and old, and the only rule is you got to go counterclockwise. Would you approve that? Probably not. The idea that a spontaneous order can erupt on the ice skating rink and that people can work this out for themselves is not instinctive. But this is what makes America work. Markets, I finally figured out, police themselves better than the regulators do. It's not perfect. There'll always be some end-runs and Bernie Madoffs and bubbles, but for the most part, they're pretty rare. In a $16 trillion economy, very few scams. I could find scams when I was a local TV reporter. Then I got to nasty ones day after day. But then I got to ABC and Good Morning America 2020, and I looked for big national scams. And they were very rare. Because in a free society, under capitalism, the way to get really rich is to serve your customers well. Bill Gates had to serve us well to get that rich. The cheaters thrive for a while, and the regulation doesn't even affect them. The people selling the breast enlargers and the burn fatty and sleep pills, they're still getting away with it despite all the rules. But they don't grow big, they stay semi-underground. The successful companies are the ones that do a good job. Sometimes people say, okay, that'll work for simple stuff like clothing, computers, movies, music. But when it comes to more serious things, whether we are alive or dead, or complicated things like education or healthcare, then you need the central plan. Because we don't know enough. You don't know what the curriculum should be. And when you're having a heart attack, you don't know which hospital to go to. I mean, the idea that this could be worked out by the market just doesn't make sense. Except I answer that, think about cars. You don't understand cars either. I assume few of you are car experts. I don't know why one runs better than another or is safer than another. And yet, consider the worst you can buy here in Pennsylvania and compare it to the absolute best the central planners could produce. That was this car. This was the pride of the Eastern Bloc. This was made by actual rocket scientists. They were the East Germans. And it was a terrible car. You had to put the oil and gas in separately and then shake the car to mix them together. It polluted. It was hard to drive. I've driven them. There was a 5-year waiting list to get them behind the Iron Curtain. And then when the Iron Curtain went down and the Berlin Wall fell, it disappeared. So why? Why could their best not compete with our mediocre stuff? Because not everybody needs to be an expert for the free market to work its magic. You just need a few people, a few car buffs, or a few people who read the car magazines. And good and bad news spread. The good companies thrive, the bad ones atrophy. That's all you need. Works even better now with the internet. The free market will protect us better than government ever can. Some people might say, well, what about safety? You gotta have government for that, because what does the factory owner care if his workers are injured? He just wants to make money, he'll get another worker. He has no reason to have decent safety rules. We need OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and we got OSHA, a rule book. Factories have to do this and that. Like all government, of course, now the rule book is paid is much higher than that, and even the lawyers who specialize aren't clear what the rules are. But the head of OSHA could proudly show this graph. Look how workplace fatalities have dropped since the beginning of OSHA. And it's impressive. And injuries drop roughly about the same slope of the line. So that's a wonderful thing. You instinctively would say, thank God for government, except then a researcher happened to go and chart workplace fatalities from after OSHA and before OSHA too. Government is like somebody who jumps in front of a parade and claims it led the parade. In a free society, things get better on their own. As we get richer, we care more about safety. When there are accidents, we learn from the mistakes. Unions may help suggesting a rule. Even the most venal factory owner cares, if only for self-interest, because he has to spend money to retrain workers to replace the ones he killed. All the natural market forces work toward making something better. We don't need government to do this. And yet, government keeps trying to do things. How about the poverty is another good example. When I was your age, you students, Lyndon Johnson had just declared the war on poverty, and this made all the sense in the world to me. Why in a rich country did people need to be poor? We had experts who could help them, just a few government programs, take from the filthy rich, create programs for these poor people. We would end poverty. And again, it's like the OSHA chart. They made a difference. First, as you can see from when the war on poverty began, poverty dropped sharply for the first 6 years. But as you could see, before that, Americans were lifting themselves out of poverty on their own. You could make an argument that the war, by creating welfare, sped the process briefly. But then it stopped. Ever since, progress retreated, went up, down, up lately, because the government programs not only often don't work, but they create nasty, unintended side effects. In the case of the welfare state, we taught people to be dependent. We rewarded people for not trying, and some of them took us up on it. We don't need all this government, and yet that's what we have. Here's a graph of the growth of government per person spending since the beginning of the Republic. You notice that for most of our history, when we grew the fastest, government was less than 5% of the economy. Then you get the first blip, World War I, World War II. It used to go down after wars. Now it always goes up. Then it's the war on poverty, and we're at the unsustainable level we are now. The only reason it has a little dip at the end is because the stimulus under Bush spent an extra $1 trillion, and some of that was not repeated, but the line is going to start going straight up again. This is a bad thing. This sucks the life out of people. This cripples an economy, takes away our choices, and we can't pay for this. The market would do it better. Just leaving people alone. Now, I don't think the market will take care of everything. We need some government. You need law to keep people safe, to give you personal security. And I would add that you should have some pollution rules. Founders didn't think of that, but I don't think there's a good market incentive to get people to behave well. Your smoke goes to somebody else's lawn. So we need government for some things. But how much? What's the right percent? 5%? 3% like it was for most of the country? We're now at about 40%. If you include state and local government. Because government always grows, and it will keep growing. Thomas Jefferson said it's the natural progress of things for government to grow and liberty to yield. This is not a good thing. They keep doing more. Nancy Pelosi says, the cupboard is empty. The cupboard is bare. Spending $3.5 trillion on ridiculous stuff. You helped give me a beach house. I thank you. I built a house on the edge of the ocean. Here it is. Oh, that's younger me up on the porch. And I asked my father for help on the mortgage, and he said, no, are you crazy? It's on sand in the edge of an ocean. And I said, but look at all this big dune I've got in front. I've got my snow fence there. Stuff's growing there. It's going to be safe. And anyway, there's this program called Federal Flood Insurance. It's dirt cheap, but in the unlikely event of a flood, I will be compensated for what I invest. And it was true. One more government program, well-meaning people saying, gee, after disasters, we spend so much bailing people out. Why don't we encourage them to buy insurance? And why don't they buy insurance? Oh, it's so expensive. Greedy private companies are charging too much. We can price it properly, be wise government officials, and because there aren't floods all over the country at the same time, we won't lose money on it. Of course, as always, it's now 16 billion in the hole and going up. And it's going up because they don't know how to price things properly, and I didn't know how to pick property properly either, and sure enough, within about 8 years, this happened. The first floor went out. You paid to rebuild it, it went out again, the house went, and you paid to cover me for the investment in the house. I thank you, I never invited you there, but thank you. And I apologize, I won't do it again. But this is what government does. More and more. Finally, we're having a conversation. Maybe this time people are waking up to the idea that we need to put a stop to that. I don't know. The Congress caved to raising the debt ceiling today, as you probably know. Yeah. It comes to me back to the more basic question. Why are we prosperous? Why do people do well? Why do some do well when most don't? 7 billion people on Earth. 1 billion live horrible lives on a buck or two a day. Less than 1 billion live near our level of comfort. How come we did well when most people don't? I have a charity which puts my videos, offers them free to teachers, called Stossel in the Classroom. It's mostly used by high school teachers. And one of the more popular shows that they play for the kids is one called Is America Number One? Sort of jingoistic. I should have called it Why Are We Prosperous? But in that show, I ask a group of high school kids in an auditorium like this, why? And there's silence. And then somebody says, well, it's because we have democracy. And later somebody said, oh, we're a relatively new country, so we have lots of natural resources. And I reply, well, those are good things. We didn't really invent democracy. The Greeks had it, but democracy's good. Except, India has democracy. India has natural resources, but India's poor. Oh, it's overpopulated, they said. And I can answer, and I was in New Jersey at the time, well, actually the population density of India is the same as that of New Jersey. New Jersey does, okay. Some of you guys agree. And what about Hong Kong? Hong Kong has no natural resources, it's just a rock, though it's a port. And no democracy. They had the Chinese rulers, and before that, the British rulers. And yet, Hong Kong in 50 years went from third world to first world. Went from poverty to roughly our level of wealth. Why? Because they had the ingredients that make people prosperous. It's 2 things. Rule of law and economic freedom. By rule of law, I mean a reasonable assumption that somebody isn't going to steal your stuff, a deed to your property. And the worst places to live are the countries that don't have that. The African country, where you're afraid to build a factory because your neighbor may steal what you make, or the dictator may take your whole factory. So nobody builds, everybody stays poor. And after that, economic freedom. Leave people alone to try things. And they had that in Hong Kong. I went around the world to illustrate the story, and in Hong Kong, I could open a business in a day. They got this because they had the British rulers who enforced rule of law, punished people who would kill each other or rob each other, but then they sat around and drank tea. They practiced benign neglect, and free people left alone made themselves wealthy. In India, I tried to open a business and I couldn't get close to it. It would have taken years. At the time, you had to get 20 permits to buy a computer. In America, it took 2 months. And as I mentioned before, we increasingly have rules that bar this kind of thing in America. Economic freedom is what works. Business makes people's lives better. And yet, at universities like this one, people hate business. People say, oh, they're taking something from me. And I really noticed this because I went from Consumer Reported bashing business to bashing regulation and often saying free markets are a good thing. And suddenly, I stopped winning Emmy Awards. And some people around me in Little Manhattan, where I live, hated me. Peter Jennings, when he saw me in the hall at ABC, would go, what? Somebody came up to me on the street. Are you John Stossel? Yes. I hope you die. So I'm trying to figure out what's the hatred about. At first, maybe it's because they think of me, because I'm criticizing regulation, that I'm a conservative. And where I live, that's the worst thing you can be. That's like being a child molester. But I'm a lousy conservative. Conservatives have a right to be angry that I was the closest thing to it on network TV for a while. Now, because I'm a libertarian, and I think that prostitution should be legal, that drugs should be legal. I was against going into all these foreign countries and fighting wars. I think gambling should be legal. I think people should be free to do anything that's peaceful. Social conservatives disagree. So, I'm honoring you for hosting me. Some of you are social conservatives for hosting me. I find you're much more open-minded than the left is about difference. And so then I'm trying to think, well, I'm close to the old liberal I was. Why do these New Yorkers hate me? Because I'm defending business. Why do they so hate business? Is it envy of the money? I thought it might be that they're influenced by their college professor who was envious of his slightly stupider roommate who went into business and made more money than he did. But then I thought about and we have big wealth disparity in America. It makes me uncomfortable too. People don't like it. But then I thought about the disparity in old Europe. The kings and queens were 1,000,000 times richer than the average person. But they weren't hated. They were revered. People hated the bourgeoisie. They gave them that nasty name. They hated the very people who sold them things that made their lives better. What's this about? And the more I think about it, the more I conclude that unless you have an economic education or unusual instincts, as some of you have if you're here, you think of business as a zero-sum game. If he made a profit, he made it off me. I must have lost something. It's harder to get the concept that business is win-win. The transaction doesn't happen unless both of you win. There are only two ways to do things in life, right? Either force or voluntary. And we need some force. As I said, you need a rule of law, people say. But the best of life is the voluntary part. And when I say business is voluntary, and it doesn't happen unless you both win, what I mean is that because it's voluntary, it only happens if you both win. And you see it in the simplest transaction. If you bought a cup of coffee today, maybe you gave her a buck, she gave you the coffee, and there was this weird double thank you moment. Thank you, thank you. Why do you both say thank you? Because you wanted the coffee more than you wanted the buck. If you wanted the buck, doesn't happen unless you both win. And every transaction is like that. So it's not the zero-sum game that the lawyers and politicians imagine. And I see why they do, because their world does work that way. One person wins, somebody else loses. But business, being voluntary, is different. It's not like there's this pie and Bill Gates took a big chunk so we have less. To get rich, he had to bake 1,000 new pies and price them for less. He got rich, and he made us all richer in the process. It's win-win, but people don't get it. Instinct says, this works better. So this is why I wrote this book. It was a play on the "Yes, we can" from the first Obama campaign. And people were so enthused. He was the magic mouth politician who was going to fix everything. And you know, there's nothing wrong with saying, yes, we can, if we means free people. But they took it to mean government. Government fails, though individuals do succeed. If government leaves us alone, because then economic freedom brings prosperity. And economists focus on the prosperous part of that equation, but the freedom part is just as important. I object to big government not just because it makes us poor, though it does. It's a moral objection, because when government is big, it reduces our control over our own lives, our self-ownership. It limits our ability to write the script to our own life. It makes us less. We become small. Government programs cut the tendrils of civil society, of voluntary society, where we work things out among ourselves, because it makes it more difficult to do that. Crowds out good things. Somehow, despite the big government we have, voluntary networks of private individuals do manage to produce all kinds of good things. Like Penn State said, it's founded by no government involvement. Unfortunately now you've been polluted with government involvement, but at the beginning it wasn't there. Clubs, charities, families working toward common goals, and greedy, profit-seeking private enterprise too. What have they brought? Computers, iPhones, air conditioning, flush toilets, really good stuff. Kings and queens live less well than poor people live in America now because of capitalism. Capitalism has lifted more people out of the mud and misery of stoop labor than any system ever. It's vilified on college campuses and newsrooms. We take it for granted. You take it for granted. When you go to a supermarket, do you ever thank capitalism? No, you just take it for granted that it's open all the time, maybe 24/7. It's well lit, the aisles are wide, the food's unbelievably cheap, they rarely poison us. During the Obamacare debate, the Detroit Medical Center proudly announced that it was going to be the first big medical center to use barcodes to keep track of patient records. And everybody applauded, and presumably that was good. But nobody pointed out that what took them so long? Coke and candy in supermarkets did this 40 years ago for profit. Healthcare is behind because government pays half the bills, at least. Destroys the market. One last example. We take it for granted that we can go to a foreign country, stick a piece of plastic in the wall, and cash comes out. And you can give the same piece of plastic to a total stranger, and he'll rent you a car for the week. And when you get home, open your mail, Visa or MasterCard, the accounting will be correct to the penny. If it isn't, you'll scream, complain. You take it for granted. But government can't even count votes accurately. And our instinct is that government should run education and health care? This is crazy. Government fails when individuals succeed. Without big government, our possibilities are endless. I hope you fight for that liberty that made America great. Thank you very much.
If anyone has questions for Mr. Stossel, if you could please form a line right here.
What a shy group. But look, this courageous man got up. And it does make it easier, I agree, if it's a line before you start, why don't you just say who you are so your neighbors can get to know you?
My name's Dane Jessen. I'm studying hotel, restaurant, and institutional management. So I think I know the answer to the first part of the question, which would be, do you think the Federal Reserve has too much power? And the second part of that question would be, if you could appoint someone right now that would change your answer to the first part of the question, make it better, who would you appoint to that position?
What's the first part of my question?
Do you think the Federal Reserve has too much power?
No, that would change my answer to the first part of the question. Oh, has too much.
Do you think it has too much power, and if so, who would you appoint to change that?
Ron Paul. I'm a little embarrassed about the Federal Reserve in that I've been a reporter 43 years. I've never really, once I did a short thing about it, but never did a show on it. By happenstance, or not happenstance, because there was the changing of the guard, I finally prepared a show on it for this week, for tomorrow, which I've now postponed a week because of the current fussing over the debt. But that should be on next week, and I mean, I'm uncomfortable with it because it's complicated and boring. And I'm on television, and I can't be boring or I'll lose my show. So I delayed this, but I go back to the very first part of your question, which about comfortable with the power they had. No, isn't it amazing that we let a dozen old white people spend $4 trillion of your dollars? Most of it in secret? I mean, TARP was stupid, but that was just $1 trillion, and everybody voted on it and argued about it. The Fed, and I think they mean well, and they're smart people, but this is too much power to give to a dozen people.
Hi, I'm Neil Baldessari. I'm in the Smeel School of Business, and why don't you run for president?
Because I might win.
Why don't I run for office? Because I would suck at it. I don't have the patience to smile at donors or even the stamina. Ron Paul is, I don't know how old he is. I remember after I did an interview when he was campaigning this time before he retired. And by the way, I want to congratulate the young woman. In all these speeches, it's always the guys who get up. I thought this was a gender equal country, you know, but no, it's the guys who are the first to speak. Sorry, I lost track there. I said, do you mind this campaign? He says, no, the only thing I mind is now I don't get a chance to exercise. And I said, well, you stay in these hotels? Yeah, but I only get to go to the gym once. What do you do in Texas? I work out twice a day. So, I don't have to stand up most of these politicians.
Hello, my name's Drew McCain, I'm an aerospace engineer. I just want your honest assessment on where you think the country's headed.
I fear we're headed toward stagnation and bankruptcy. I go back to Jefferson's point. It's the natural progress of things for government to grow and liberty to yield. The Republicans complain about the taxes. I think the regulations are the big thing. The taxes go up and down. The regulations only go up. And as the debt goes up, and nobody wants to give up anything, ever. They can't do that. Even the Republicans voted against starting programs like subsidies for tiny airports that serve mostly rich people, or farm subsidies and other economy-distorting things. In Greece, where they're really in the tank, after 3 years of riots, they finally changed laws like required severance pay. Once you have something, nobody wants to go back. In Greece, the law was here. You fire somebody, severance pay 3 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks, depending on how long you work there. In Greece, it's 2 years. And they just reduced that to 1 year. But why would you hire somebody if you knew that you didn't work out? You still have to pay them for a year. And so they don't hire people. Economic arterial sclerosis. I rudely refuse to die, and we're all living longer than ever. And to cut us back, it's the only thing we can do to not bankrupt America. I don't know that the politicians have the guts to do that.
I'm Josh Beaver, I'm a senior, studying business management with a listening option at school. My general question, I just actually want to say that, Josh, I'm a big fan of yours, a big fan of your work. I definitely want to read more into this book, but I know you're a smart man, you studied history, you studied trends. My broad question to you is, how do you think we got to such a big self-government compared to individual perspective?
It's what this book is about. It's the natural progress of things. Instinct says when there's a problem, I bet some of you do it, you say, there ought to be a law. And nobody goes to Harrisburg and asks their legislator, Senator, what laws did you repeal this year? And the regulator thinks he isn't doing his job unless he adds a regulation. And until people wake up to that and pass the Stossel rule, which is that for every new law you pass, you got to repeal 4 old ones.
Hi, I'm Justin Smith. I'm studying information science and technology. I know you're somewhat familiar with things like cryptocurrency. I think I saw you talk about Bitcoin one time on a video online. I was wondering if you thought that the experiment that began with Bitcoin, these cryptocurrencies, if that has any broader perspective for you on the economy as far as currency, is concerned. And if you're familiar with the Silk Road that closed a couple weeks ago, what are your thoughts on that experiment and how that turned out?
This requires some background explanation. Yeah, I'm worried about the currency. The dollar used to say redeemable for gold. Now it just says Federal Reserve note. So it's just a promise that this is worth $1. Promise made by politicians who don't keep promises. So people want something safer, some buy gold. It's got its problems too. And before we had these national currencies and started locking people up for offering alternatives, you were free to offer the Stossel bill in Canada every day. Now you might say, well, why would anybody take a Stossel bill? Except I would say, well, I'm not in debt, and I make more, and I save than I spend, and I save some. Well, the Federal Reserve, they're in debt and spending more all the time. But you would have a choice. And Bitcoins are an electronic currency. There's a formula for how many will be issued. I bought some right before the price dropped, as people were using their internet currency to buy stuff that's illegal. There was a website called Silk Road that refused to sell bombs and poisons, but would sell weed and various drugs and some other illegal things, and he was totally anonymous. Dread Pirate Roberts, he called himself, and he couldn't be found until he was found and arrested and closed down. But immediately, other shops opened up taking Bitcoins for illegal things. It's like the drug war. It's hopeless, and government can't stomp this stuff out. And I suggest to you, you don't need to buy Bitcoins or gold. You can buy junk silver. That silver coins made before 1965, something that holds real value, so that when everybody else has to take a wheelbarrow full of dollar bills to the store to buy a loaf of bread, you can give the store a quarter and they'll take that.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Gamble. I'm a sophomore and I'm studying supply chain management, and also I'm a very big fan of yours. And I was wondering what you think the future will be like in terms of deregulation. Do you really think there's any chance for us to, repeal some of those laws? Or do you think that we're just kind of destined to just be massively regulated country?
I fear we're circling the drain. We're in a death spin. But I'm often wrong about this stuff. I'm a pessimist. I didn't think the welfare reform bill would ever be passed. I wouldn't have expected that under Jimmy Carter, they would deregulate the airlines and the Interstate Commerce Commission and oil prices. The famous Senator Scoop Jackson said, when we deregulate gas, the price is going to go through the roof. It went down because there was competition. And wonderful things happened from that deregulation. So you can make it happen. Go out there and make it happen.
All right, I'll try. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Julie Mason. I'm a freshman studying political science and classical studies. And I was wondering how you feel about the recent IRS controversies and if you see that as an example of government failing.
I heard IRS controversy, what?
If you see that as an example of government failing.
Yeah, and overreaching. And, you know, people say that you got to get the money out of government. But as long as government has enormous power over everybody's lives and employs 22 million Americans, if you include state and local governments, some of the people are going to do stupid things or cruel things or abusive things. And it's not surprising that some in the IRS did. Also, when you have a law that says you don't have to pay taxes if you spend X percent of your time on nonpartisan activities, whatever that is, all these campaign finance rules are unintelligible to the average person. Got to bring in the lawyers, and the IRS has to make a ruling. So what we need, simple rules that everyone understands. And that's what we had when we grew the fastest, and government was so much smaller in our early days. I mean, what built the country? It was this. It's the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. It's this then. And it doesn't have pollution control rules, it had slavery, it had some bad stuff in here. But it doesn't need to be 175,000 pages of federal law that we have now. Who wants a copy of this? Yes.
Hey John, how you doing? Justin Scarpello, I'm a big fan of yours as well. I'm studying supply chain and information systems in the Seattle College of Business. My question I had for you was, one of the things that I really see is, America falling behind is our educational program and our systems, especially in the grade schools. I look at the deregulation of the airline industries, followed by the re-regulations, how that kind of created a natural oligopoly. Do you think we encounter similar problems with the educational system?
And by the educational system, you mean college or K-12?
I mean K-12.
Totally. One of my more successful shows was the first show I did called Stupid in America, where we looked at K-12 education. And this really woke me up. And then, again, forgive me for another long answer because there's a bunch of you online, but I really explained this. You can go on for a while. Most of your parents presumably think the public schools are pretty good, and the suburban schools seem good. But it's like the old black and white telephones or the post office before you had Federal Express. You don't know what you might have had. And on the international tests, we Americans don't do as well as people from other countries. Only competition brings out the best, and they have some more in other countries. So what do we have in America? We have a government-run school system. They call it public education. I call it government education because it isn't very public. You don't get to pick your school. You can't walk into a school like you can walk into a supermarket. It's government education. And when they started that, Horace Mann in Massachusetts said, we'll eliminate all the crimes of the penal code by having government education. And the promises of the central planners are rarely met, and nobody calls on it. It calls them on it. It just grew. And what kind of system is it where you're assigned by your zip code? What if you were assigned your grocery store that way? It's just crazy. The grocery store wouldn't compete, as the schools barely compete. People say, well, they aren't spending enough money. In Pennsylvania now, they're spending over $10,000 per student. Do the math. It's more than $200,000 per classroom, not including the cost of the buildings, so the capital cost. So think how many good teachers you could hire for $200,000. Where does the money go? Nobody knows. It's a monopoly. They just hire the assistant principals, the assistant janitors. They make it manage. Now we have the charter school movements, the voucher movement, tax credits, a little slice of competition. And some of them suck. But that's okay, because when they suck, they go out of business. Government schools never go out of business. But gradually, the good schools are growing. And some of them are wonderful. I've gone to schools in Harlem where kids are excited about coming to school. So that's my hope, that when parents say, hey, Johnny down the street likes going to school and they're learning, then more people will want that.
John, Chris Conzel, studying chemical engineering and also a member of the Navy ROTC here at Penn State. I actually have a question about the military itself. As we kind of decrease our military spending, would it be wise, especially as other countries like China are flexing their muscles militarily, especially in the Pacific and in the Middle East?
Would it be wise to do what?
Would it be wise to cut it down, especially going back to the libertarian view of having only an army specializing in just national defense?
I think it would be wise, because I don't believe that having our ships off the coast of China helps. China is going to dominate. What does that mean? Japan freeloads off our military now. So we have 60,000 soldiers in Germany, 30,000 in Korea, 30,000 in Japan. I thought we won, those wars were over, but we keep our troops there. I don't see us having influence. We supposedly had influence with Egypt after giving them $3 billion a year. What influence did we have when the governments changed? I'm not an isolationist. Libertarians get accused of being that. I don't want to isolate. I want to trade with everybody. I want to interact with the world. I just don't want to try to run the world. And let neocons smuggle books that glorify autocrats into other countries around the world. Let our movies and music inspire Arab kids to see that there's another way of thinking about things. But I think the cuts that have been made in the military, which are small, are fine. And military now is $600 billion. I would go several hundred billion further.
Thank you.
Hi, John. My name is Anthony Schifano. Currently, I'm a junior at Mifflin County High School. Hope to major in business one day. As the things stand, do you think that capitalism can survive in America?
The only thing that makes me think it will survive is when there are high school students like you who care about these things and have no Thank you. I take it your teacher played the Stossel in the classroom stuff? Is that how you were injured? Yes. There it is. Boy, they were a pack. They all disappeared at once.
Well, it looks like we're just about out of time for today. Let's give Mr. Stossel another round of applause. Appreciate you all for coming out here. Please stay tuned. We'll have many more events coming later this semester and next semester. If you want any more information,